I never wanted to join the family business after graduating college with honors and earning a degree in financial management. My dream was different. I aspired to leave my mark in the world of large corporations, build a career from the ground up, and be part of something grand and international. I worked long and hard to ensure my achievements were noticed. Several prestigious companies had already shown interest in my resume. I could have chosen any of the offers, and the moment I received an interview invitation from Goldman Sachs, I felt I was getting closer to my goal, to the pinnacle I had always admired with respect and awe. But life had other plans. The dreams I had built over years began to crumble. My name is Laura, and since childhood, I have been a responsible child. My older brother Amato, on the other hand, was the golden child, the perfect son, incapable of wrongdoing. His life was full of ease, the latest gadgets, the trendiest clothes, and the undivided attention of our parents. From the start, I understood that if I wanted to achieve anything, it would have to be better, smarter, and stronger. I could not afford to be weak. My path to success was always more challenging. To be self-sufficient, I started working as a teenager. My summer vacations were spent immersed in studying and part-time work at our company. It wasn't easy, but I believed this was the way to earn my own money and prove to my parents that I could be independent. Our family business, trading in the global market, had been around for 3 generations. My great-grandfather began with 2 containers he used to transport electronics from Taiwan. By the time my father took over, it had grown into a solid mid-sized company importing goods from all over Asia. I knew this business inside and out. My summer jobs at the company taught me everything I needed to understand how international trade, logistics, and financial flows worked. But despite this, I never thought I would run the company. That role was meant for Amato. He was the elder sibling. He was destined to take over from my father. That's what I was always told, and I accepted it as a given. So, what now? Why had everything suddenly changed? One evening, my father called me for a talk. His voice was unusually serious, immediately catching my attention. I had just finished telling him about the promising interview with Goldman Sachs when he said, "Laura, we need to talk." I got up and walked over to him sitting in his office, and I immediately felt that something was wrong. His face was lined with worry. "The company isn't doing well," he said, and I instantly knew he was preparing me for something serious. "We are losing money faster than ever before." A knot formed in my stomach, and as I tried to remain calm, I thought, "Amato, you're teaching him the basics of business, right? You said he would take over." But my father continued, and his next words stunned me. "Your brother, he wasn't ready, yesterday." He hesitated, then went on, his face reddening with embarrassment. "He submitted an expense report for a $5,000 dinner with clients at that new French restaurant when I asked him about it. He couldn't recall a single detail of the business discussion we had." I stayed silent, trying to process his words, though my emotions churned inside me. "And what does that have to do with me?" I asked, though I was already beginning to understand where this was headed. He looked at me, his voice growing firmer. "I need you to take over as CEO, my father said. You're smart, responsible, and you know the business. The company needs you, Laura." I sat there, stunned. All these years, I had been told that inheriting the business was Amato's privilege. And now, because he couldn't handle it, they wanted me to step in and fix everything. I started to protest, for I had my own plans, my own life, my own dreams. What about my career plans? I blurted out, feeling the protest rising within me. "I worked hard for this, Dad. My interviews are lined up. I was ready to join the global giants, and now—" "This is our family's legacy," my father interrupted, his voice trembling slightly with tension. "Your great-grandfather built this company from nothing. Are you really going to let it collapse?" I glanced at the old black-and-white photograph hanging on the wall. It showed my great-grandfather proudly standing in front of the first warehouse, his face radiating confidence and pride in what he had built. The weight of 3 generations of history bore down on me, and I felt its pressure. Amato wouldn't like this, I thought. "I'll do it," I finally said, though I wasn't entirely sure. Deep down, I already knew I couldn't refuse. My first day as CEO of Global Trading felt surreal. Walking through the familiar hallways, the faces of the employees I met felt so close. I remembered them from the days when I was a teenager, running errands, filing documents, and helping wherever I could. This wasn't just a family business, it was something more, a part of my life, something I carried within me, even if I hadn't wanted to acknowledge it. But now everything had changed. In those first 2 weeks, I completely immersed myself in financial reports. My degree in financial management finally proved useful, and to be honest, it wasn't quite as I had imagined. Mrs. Rodriguez, our head of accounting, and her team became my indispensable allies. They provided me with years of records and explained the accounting methods I needed to use. Working with this data was not only challenging but incredibly important. I felt that the stakes weren't just the company's future but also my personal reputation. One evening, Mrs. Rodriguez placed a thick folder of reports on my desk. She looked at me with a hint of regret in her eyes and said, "I hate to show you this, but you need to see where the money is actually going." I took the folder and began carefully reviewing the documents. Soon, the numbers began to tell their own story, a story of extravagance and unchecked spending. My blood boiled with anger. All these expenses that I couldn't explain became more absurd with every new report. One of the most shocking revelations was the purchase of a Tesla Model S for $80,000, recorded just 6 months ago as transportation expenses. Following that was the rent for a downtown penthouse, $112,000 a month, classified as client entertainment expenses. Finally, there were purchases totaling $25,000 at Armani, somehow listed under professional development. I felt my face flush with anger. These weren't mere mistakes, this was a scheme of wastefulness disguised as business necessities. Did my father know about these reports? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Mrs. Rodriguez shook her head. Amato always managed to present things differently to your father. He made it vague, and the details got lost in broader categories. It was an explanation, but it didn't ease my unease. I stayed up late that night, delving into every detail. The more I dug, the more I found. The expense reports revealed weekend trips to Las Vegas, billed as client relationship building. Then there were designer suits and watches purchased with company funds, recorded as corporate image maintenance. These details added up to a fortune, and all of it pointed to one thing: the company was bleeding money, and the reasons were clear: my brother's reckless spending habits. By the time I completed the audit, I had a draft for a new company expense policy that would eliminate all these unwarranted privileges. Everyone, including Amato, would operate on a standard salary. No luxury cars, no penthouses, no shopping sprees disguised as business expenses. I printed the final page of the document and, looking at the old black and white photo of my great-grandfather standing proudly in front of the company's first warehouse, made a quiet promise: I'm going to fix this. It wasn't just a promise, it was my duty. To him, to our family, to this business that had endured through generations. I knew a storm was brewing. Amato wouldn't accept these changes without a fight. But I had the numbers, I had the documents, and most importantly, I had the authority to implement these necessary reforms. Let him try to justify the $1,200 swim trunks he classified as business expenses. I was ready to confront him. I was reviewing supplier contracts when the door to my office slammed open so hard it bounced off the wall. Amato stormed in, his face red with fury. He was waving a copy of the new expense policy I had distributed that morning. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, throwing the document onto my desk. "You think you can just walk in here and take everything away from me?" I kept my voice steady, refusing to show irritation. "These are necessary changes to save the company, Amato." "Bullshit," he spat, his voice brimming with anger and contempt. "You've always been jealous of me, always trying to prove you're better than me, and now you're using Dad's temporary insanity to push me out." I looked up, maintaining my composure. "No one's pushing you out," I said calmly. But the company can't afford to fund your lifestyle anymore. My lifestyle? He scoffed bitterly. You must be joking. I bring in half of our clients. Who do you think they want to deal with? Someone who dines at cheap restaurants and drives a Toyota? His tone dripped with disdain, but I was prepared. They want to deal with a solvent company, I countered. And we won't stay solvent if you keep spending recklessly. Go to hell, Laura, he shouted, kicking a visitor's chair, which crashed against the wall. You're just a jealous little nobody who can't stand that I've made it. I watched silently as he stormed around the office. His face was flushed, and the desk was left covered in scattered papers. He stormed out, slamming the door behind him, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I knew this was only the beginning. At our family dinner on Saturday, the tension was palpable from the start. Mom was unusually quiet, serving the roast in silence, avoiding my gaze. Dad nervously cleared his throat, keeping his eyes downcast. Finally, it was Mom who broke the silence, unable to hold back any longer. Laura, don't you think you're being a bit harsh with your brother? Her voice was soft but carried a tone of reproach. He's worked so hard for the company, hasn't he? I reached for my briefcase. I had been expecting this. Do you want to see exactly how Amato has been working hard with the company's money? I spread the documents across the table next to Mom's finest china. Credit card statements, expense reports, receipts, all meticulously highlighted and annotated. Here's the penthouse he rented with company funds, I pointed to the figures. Here's the Tesla he bought. Here are the trips to Vegas, designer shopping sprees, and dinners costing thousands of dollars. Mom shook her head. He's meeting with clients, entertaining them. It's part of the business. I paused and pointed to a specific receipt. Like $1,200 swim trunks? Or a $15,000 watch? Mom frowned but didn't back down. Your brother has always had a good sense for business. He knows how to make people feel special. Dad was studying the documents closely, his expression growing darker with every page. Finally, he broke the silence. These numbers. He sighed. Are they all true, Amato? My brother, sitting at the other end of the table, shrugged. They're all legitimate business expenses. Laura is just too rigid to understand how modern business works. Enough. Dad's voice was unexpectedly loud. He looked tired, visibly older in that moment. Laura is right. These expenses need to stop. Amato opened his mouth to argue, but Dad raised his hand, silencing him. But, Dad added, Laura will also need to help you learn how to properly manage the company. I froze, stunned. Dad, He shook his head as if anticipating my objections. No, Laura. My ultimate plan is to divide the company equally between the two of you, 50-50. But that will only work if you both know how to run it. He looked at me pleadingly. Will you teach him? I glanced at Amato, who was staring at his plate, his jaw clenched and his eyes brimming with anger. Teaching him? It felt like trying to teach a cat to swim. But I found myself saying, yes, I'll try. Sitting in the conference room, looking at my brother, I couldn't help but recall our childhood. While I toiled over homework, he sped around in the Porsche he got for his 16th birthday. While I spent my summers learning the basics of business, he partied in the Hamptons. Mom and Dad always said he was living life to the fullest, while I was too serious. Now, years later, we sat at the same table, not for a family dinner, but on a battlefield, each of us defending our place in our family's legacy. I remember one Christmas when I asked for accounting software to practice with, and they gave me a sweater. Amato got a jet ski that year. They nodded in admiration as he cut through the waves, as if his success was their own triumph. When I graduated with honors, Mom congratulated me warmly, and Dad shook my hand. But when Amato graduated with straight C's, they threw a lavish party with champagne and music. It wasn't that they didn't love me. They did. But their love for him was more obvious, more demonstrative, more complete. Now, watching him slouch in his expensive chair during yet another budget meeting, I saw the results of that upbringing. Amato, are you following the quarterly forecasts? I asked, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. He glanced up from his phone. Yeah, numbers go up, that's good. Numbers go down, that's bad. Can we wrap this up? I suppressed my irritation. It's a bit more complex, I replied, keeping my tone calm. These forecasts affect our inventory decisions for the next 6 months. He sighed dramatically but, to my surprise, set his phone aside. Small victories. I made a point of including him in every significant meeting, client negotiations, supplier contract discussions, strategic sessions. If it concerned the company, I wanted him to be there. Most of the time, he just sat quietly, staring at the board or glancing at his watch. Sometimes he fiddled with a pen, clearly bored. But occasionally, he surprised me. Why don't we try importing luxury pet products? He suggested one day. Rich people are going crazy over their dogs. We could charge insane prices. I smiled, trying to respond gently. The market is already saturated, and the certification process for pet products is too complicated. Another time, he proposed, what if we invest everything in cryptocurrency? My friend made millions last month. I had to take a deep breath. We need more stable investments for the company fund, I explained, striving not to sound condescending. His ideas were impractical or overly risky, but at least he was starting to think about the business. That was progress. During a meeting with our largest client, he unexpectedly stepped up. He listened attentively throughout the discussion and then said, you're pretty good at this. You handled their pricing concerns impressively. It was probably the first genuine compliment I had ever heard from him. Thank you, Amato, I replied. Would you like to grab lunch? I could explain the negotiation strategy one used. No, I already have plans, he said, heading for the door. But maybe next time. I watched him leave, reflecting on how the patterns set in childhood shape us as adults. Amato never had to try because everything was handed to him. For me, it was always different. I had to work twice as hard to prove my worth. Now I faced a challenge that no one but me could tackle, teaching him what I had learned over 8 years: early mornings, late nights, tough decisions, precise management. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I had to try. The party for Dad's 70th birthday was meant to be a celebration of our success. A private room at the Golden Palace restaurant was filled with close family friends and our most important business partners. These were the same people who had watched our company teeter on the edge of bankruptcy and then rise to become an industry leader. The numbers spoke for themselves. Profits had grown by 300% since I took over. 5 new branches had opened across the state. The client list had tripled. Global trading was no longer fighting to survive, it was thriving. I stood to the side, watching his dad, pride radiating from him, thanked everyone for their support. His words were warm and joyful, but they didn't mention the sleepless nights I had spent pulling the company out of crisis. This was his moment, and I wasn't going to take it away from him. Amato stood beside him, smiling and shaking hands with the guests. His expensive suit fit perfectly, and a crowd always seemed to gather around him. People admired his charm, his effortless charisma. I noticed him glance over at me and lift his champagne glass, nodding slightly. It was a small gesture of acknowledgement. I returned the nod. In that moment, I realized that for both of us, this was a new chapter. We had both changed, though in different ways. What that meant for our future remained to be seen. I stood in the center of the room, surrounded by people who had been part of my life but now felt like strangers. My father, mother, brother, relatives, business partners, they were all looking at me, but their gazes held no empathy. My chest tightened with anger, resentment, and disappointment, but above all, betrayal. My words cut through the silence. 8 years. I've given 8 years of my life to this company. I saved it from collapse. I pulled it out of debt, established connections, opened new branches. For 8 years, I sacrificed everything for this family, for you, Dad, for you, Mom, and so Amato could at least learn the basics of business. And this is how you repay me? Mom raised her hand as if to stop me. Laura, sweetheart, we appreciate everything you've done, but... But what, Mom? I interrupted, my voice shaking. You appreciate it? Is this your gratitude? You're handing the company to someone who has always treated money as a toy and business as a form of entertainment. Amato smirked, that same smirk that accompanied every victory of his, whether earned or gained at my expense. He couldn't resist the sarcasm. Maybe cut the drama. You always make everything so complicated, Laura. Dad made his decision. Deal with it. I stepped toward him, feeling the anger rise within me. Deal with it? My voice trembled, but not from weakness. Deal with the fact that everything I've done is being thrown away? That you, a person who has no idea how to run a business, are getting everything I fought for? Dad intervened, his voice weary but firm. Laura, the decision has been made. It's family tradition. You've known this from the beginning. I turned to him, feeling tears well up but refusing to let them fall. From the beginning? I let out a bitter laugh. If I had known my efforts meant nothing, do you think I would have stayed? Do you think I would have spent years of my life proving that I was worthy of your recognition? Mom threw up her hands. Laura, stop. You're being selfish. This is your Father's Day, it's a celebration. How can you ruin it like this? Selfish. The word rang in my head like a bell. I turned to her, my anger turning cold. Selfish? When I worked 60-hour weeks to keep the company from going bankrupt, was that selfish? When I gave up my dream of a career at Goldman Sachs to save your family business, was that selfish? When I endured humiliation and tried to teach Amato even the basics of what he should have known from the start, was that selfish? Dad waved his hand dismissively, as if to cut me off. You're just jealous, Laura. You've always been jealous of your brother. Those words hit me like a lightning strike. Jealous? I'd always been jealous. I took a deep breath, holding myself back from breaking down. Jealous? You think I wanted to be part of this? You think I envied your nods of approval to Amato, your grand celebrations in his honor, your words about how talented he was when he couldn't even bother to show up? Mom pointed coldly to the door. If you can't be happy for your brother's success, you'd better leave. I looked around. The gazes of the relatives were turned away, as if they were afraid to meet my eyes. Business partners, who had once looked at me with respect, were now turning away, clearly unwilling to be involved in this scene. Mom stared at me with righteous indignation, as though I were the sole cause of this awkwardness. Dad avoided my gaze, as if my pain and my truth were too unpleasant for him. Amato stood there, grinning like a winner who had gotten everything without a single fight. It was the same grin he had worn as a child when our parents handed him another toy I could only dream of. I slowly stood up from the chair. My mind was a whirlwind of hurt, anger, betrayal, and pain. But one thing was clear. You all deserve each other, I said softly, feeling the words I had been holding back for years finally escape. 8 years. 8 years I dedicated to this family, this company, and all this time, you never understood who really kept it all afloat. But fine. You'll get what you deserve. I turned and left the room, leaving behind a hall full of people who had never seen me as an equal. Every word, every smile now seemed like a lie. Outside the door, I stopped, straightened up, and for the first time in a long time, felt a weight lift from my soul. Everything I had done for them. But now, it was time to do something for myself. I remember slowly gathering my things from the desk for the last time. The office, which had been my second home for 8 years, now felt foreign. Amato had already taken my place. He sat in my old chair, his feet up on the desk, wearing the same careless grin I had known since childhood. Don't forget to leave the keys, he tossed out without even looking up from his phone. In response, I neatly placed my resignation letter on the desk. Without a word, I packed my life into a cardboard box. Papers, a few personal photos, a couple of books, everything that remained from those 8 years. There was a bitter irony in that. But I knew one thing: despite the hurt, I wasn't leaving empty-handed. I had always lived modestly, and the savings accumulated over the years allowed me to buy a cozy apartment in a historic neighborhood. For the first time in a long while, I didn't have plans for the near future, and I allowed myself the luxury of taking a break, the first real vacation since college. The first signs of trouble at Global Trading appeared 3 months later. Mrs. Rodriguez, our longtime accountant, invited me for coffee. She looked tired, her hands gripping her cup tightly. "They fired me," she said, not looking up. "Amato thinks my methods are too old-fashioned." I listened to her with bitter calmness, almost anticipating what would come next. Sure enough, in the following weeks, I received calls from other former colleagues. Amato had replaced most of the senior management with his college friends. The new CFO, it turned out, was a guy he had once hung out with. Barely finished with business school, and now he was in charge of millions of dollars. "He's back to his old habits," James, the former VP of operations, told me. He recently bought a Maserati as his company car. But the worst, as it turned out, was yet to come. The first serious crisis hit when our main supplier raised their prices. Instead of negotiating or finding a reliable alternative, Amato chose a new, dubious supplier whose prices were suspiciously low. "Half of the products are defective," Sarah from Quality Control told me before she was also fired. "But he doesn't listen. He says we're too picky." The outcome was predictable. Within 6 months, the company lost 3 major clients. 8 months later, most of the longtime partners stopped working with Global Trading. Everything I had worked so hard to build, everything I had saved and developed over 8 years, collapsed like a house of cards. I heard the news from old colleagues, through business networks, and from casual mentions in the media. But I felt nothing, no anger, no pain. Only emptiness. It was inevitable. Exactly 1 year after that fateful birthday dinner, the phone rang. The screen displayed my father's name. I stared at the phone for a long moment before picking up. The remnants of filial duty still lived somewhere deep inside me. "Laura," his voice sounded older, tired. "We need to talk." I stayed silent, letting the silence stretch. "Amato, he didn't manage things the way we hoped," he finally said, clearing his throat. "The company is in trouble. Real trouble." I leaned back in my chair, remaining silent. "We need you to come back," he said. "You can set your terms. Full control, whatever salary you want. Amato will step aside." I couldn't hold back my laugh. A bitter, piercing laugh, more like a scream. "Now you want me back? After you threw away 8 years of my work for the sake of tradition? This is our family's legacy, Laura." His voice carried a note of desperation. "Your great-grandfather's company. You can't just let it die." I squinted, trying to keep my tone steady. "My great-grandfather's company died the day you chose your son's ego over your daughter's confidence." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then his voice became almost a whisper. "Laura, please. You know it's not just about the company. It's about our family. About your legacy. You have a responsibility." "No, Dad," my voice turned cold. "My responsibility ended a year ago, when you made your choice. Now live with it." I hung up the phone, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. That call had been the last thread tying me to Global Trading. And now, it was severed. I set the phone aside, letting the sound of the notification dissolve into the night silence. The cool, fresh air flowed through the open balcony doors, caressing my skin. Sitting on the terrace of my penthouse, I gazed at the city lights flickering like millions of tiny stars scattered across the earth. This view was a reminder of how far I had come, how high I had risen, despite everything I had left behind. I thought about what was written in the Wall Street Journal article. An innovative approach to international trade. The words sounded nice, but behind them lay years of hard work, strategies I had developed late into the night, and decisions that required a steely resolve. Morton International had become what I had always dreamed of, a platform for my ideas and proof that I could succeed on my own, without anyone's approval or blessing. When I thought about global trading, the emotions, resentment, anger, and disappointment, were replaced by a strange emptiness. For a while, I really tried to understand if there was something I could have done differently. But the truth was that they never saw me as a leader, never believed in my strength. They preferred tradition and expectations over reality. And that was their choice, not mine. My great-grandfather, who started with 2 containers, knew nothing of traditions. He only knew hard work and determination. In an old photo I once saw in the office, his face radiated the confidence of a man who believed in his own strength, not in prescriptions. I wondered, had the family kept that photo? Or had it been sold along with everything else when the company collapsed? I imagined how it could have ended up in the hands of a stranger, someone who didn't know its history but perhaps saw something inspiring in it. That thought was both sad and liberating. Global trading didn't die when I left, and not even when the problem started. It died the moment it stopped being valued for its true principles: honesty, hard work, responsibility. I remembered Jennifer's story about Amato's fate. His return to his parents' house, the redecorated room, his mother preparing his favorite dishes. The picture was almost comical, but it revealed the same dynamic I had seen since childhood. Amato was always at the center of care, attention, and excuses. He always knew that whatever happened, someone would pick up the pieces. Only now, those pieces had become too large to gather. Mom and Dad were probably still making excuses for him, just as they had always done. He just hasn't found himself yet, Mom might say. He's always been talented, he just needs a little more time, Dad would add. I didn't feel anger. Only a quiet acceptance that some things never change. When I first started working at Morton International, it seemed like I had something to prove. That my achievements had to challenge those who had once doubted me. But over time, I realized that none of it mattered. I did my work not for the sake of proving anything, but because I loved it. I enjoyed making decisions that shaped reality, watching plans turn into successes, seeing ideas transform into results. Now, I was living the life I had always dreamed of. I had freedom. I had power. And I had the confidence that all of it was earned by my own efforts. On the table next to my chair was a glass of wine. I took a small sip, feeling the warmth of the drink spread through my body. Sitting under the starry sky above Manhattan, I thought about how perhaps the fate of global trading had been inevitable. They had built it on the hard work of my great-grandfather, but had forgotten what had made it strong. Legacy isn't about buildings or brands. It's not about traditions or empty expectations. Legacy is about values. And even though global trading no longer existed, its true principles, the ones my great-grandfather instilled, still lived on. Not in offices or contracts, but in me. I felt pride in myself. In the fact that, despite everything, I had kept those values. That I had continued their journey, albeit in a different form. My phone vibrated again. A new notification. The headline of the article my assistant had sent read, "CEO of Morton International creates a new era in international trade." I smiled. The sunset over the horizon of Manhattan was slowly transforming into the city's nighttime glow, full of possibilities. And though many might expect me to regret the past, I knew one thing for certain: I no longer looked back.